So whether you're a solo therapist thinking about going nonprofit, or you're just curious if this model could work for you, I'm breaking it down into three specific areas, and that's leadership, operations, and financials. And the financials also includes the funding aspect. My name is Dr. Lauren Lawson. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist in California and Pennsylvania. I am also an AAMFT approved clinical supervisor, so a big passion of mine is providing clinical supervision and training the new wave, new generation of therapists and teaching them the differences between community mental health, for profit private practices, and what I teach the middle ground, the middle path, the hybrid nonprofit private practice model, which were often not talked about, people don't know about. And so with that, I was in my doctorate program all the way back in 2011 after I graduated with my master's in Los Angeles, California, and it was time to decide what I wanted to do for my dissertation. And instead of doing a traditional research project, I chose to do program development. And I decided that I wanted to start a nonprofit. And that's really where this idea came from for me. It started back actually when I was a senior in college at Penn State, and I was working for an inpatient psychiatric unit and really got exposure to severe mental illness. And I was a volunteer on a crisis hotline where our motto was any problem, anytime. And that was the first like real exposure I got to community mental health and working for a nonprofit. So the crisis hotline that I worked on was a nonprofit. And what was so unique about it, which is very rare that this is your experience, it was a flat hierarchy. So there was not a lot of leadership. The volunteers ran the entire organization, other than the board of directors. And there were like two paid staff in between the board of directors and the group of volunteers. And the volunteers were people in the community and mostly Penn State students. So it was a super cool experience, and I absolutely loved it there. I engrossed myself in learning how to do crisis calls. And what I really found that was so cool about this organization was that it was staff led, which means any decision that needed to be made in the nonprofit, all the volunteers and all the staff got to make that decision, and we did it by voting. And it had to be a unanimous vote. So, for example, if someone was going to be fired or let go, if you came to the meeting about that, then you wanted to have a vote, then the only way that person could be fired or let go was if there was a unanimous vote. That was really my first kind of exposure to the nonprofit world. And so I kind of went into my doctorate program with this idea that I wanted to start my own nonprofit and replicate kind of that model. So I never really considered actually starting a for profit practice. It just wasn't something that I wanted to do. And to be honest, I don't regret it. To this day, I don't wish that I started a for profit practice. I'm so happy that I went the nonprofit route and I turned my dissertation into a real thriving program. I actually registered it as a nonprofit all the way back when I was doing the dissertation and started it in 2013. It was officially approved by the IRS, and we've been operating ever since. And now it's 13, 14 years later. We're in Pennsylvania, we're in California, and we have clinicians in Florida and Alabama. So we're multi state now, and it's been wonderful. I also work simultaneously in community mental health for many years, but since having my kids, I stepped down, and now I just run my nonprofit full time and help therapists start nonprofits, or at least teach that this is an option. So, today, what we're going to be diving into, and what I get asked all the time, is what is the actual difference between a nonprofit therapy practice and a for profit one? And more importantly, what's actually the same? So, I want to go into today what is the difference and what is the same so that you have a clear idea and can make an informed decision for yourself. So whether you're a solo therapist thinking about going nonprofit, or you're just curious if this model could work for you, I'm breaking it down into three specific areas, and that's leadership, operations, and financials. And the financials also includes the funding aspect. Yeah, with that, let's dive into the three different sections. I'm going to start with leadership because this is really at the top where there's the main difference between for profit and nonprofit. So, in a for profit practice, you're the owner. You make the decisions, you own the profits, and you call the shots. So, in the leadership, as a for profit practice, you're the owner, you make the decisions, you own the profits of what's made, and you call the shots what's in the for profit. In a nonprofit, you don't own it in the same way. Instead, you found it. So you're the founder, and it's ultimately governed by a board of directors. And I know that can sound scary, but hear me out. You can still be the executive director, which is setting the vision and running a show. You can pay yourself a reasonable salary that feels good to you. That's often the same salary that you would get as an owner. And you can build your board with the people that share your mission and respect your leadership. So it's not as scary as it sounds. This is where a lot of people get turned off by this model, but think of your board of directors as people who share your vision, who want to carry out your mission and are there to support you. You don't have to do it all alone. So, what's the same in leadership? Regardless of whether you're doing for profit or nonprofit, the leadership is what drives the culture, the vision, the services. And whether you're for profit or nonprofit, your values are going to shape your organization. And that is the most important thing, regardless of what model you go after. The other thing about leadership is once you get into the operations under the board, operations are the same whether you're for profit or nonprofit. You still need someone who's going to oversee the clinical services. You may still need managers. You need therapists. You need mental health workers, whatever kind of programming you do. And so the operations and the organizational chart, the org structure is yours to design. Whether you're running your own for profit practice or you're running a nonprofit, it looks different in every single business. It's not all the same. Not every nonprofit has the same organizational structure. For example, the nonprofit that I worked in that was a volunteer crisis hotline, there was no org chart. There was no hierarchy. It was a flat hierarchy and it was staff run. It was volunteer run. Whereas when you work in community mental health, there's often multiple layers. That can also happen in a for-profit practice. So, really, one of the things that was so important to me as I started my nonprofit in terms of leadership was actually minimizing the amount of hierarchy. I think the more hierarchy there is, the more as a CEO, executive leadership, you disconnect with the actual services and the quality of services. And that is a really big value of mine that I stay connected to that. So as a CEO, I'm in there. I run the operations. I see clients. I know what it's like to have to do your notes in a certain amount of time frame. I know what it's like to push productivity. So those are the things that are really important to me. And because it's my nonprofit, I can design it that however I want to. So I saw Heather commented she's serving on a board that and it's volunteer and it's a good way to contribute to your community. That's an excellent point about being on a board. If you want to give back, this is what other board members who join you in your vision, it's another way for them to have meaning within their life. So anyway, yeah, the first thing is leadership. As and to go over the key points, as a for-profit, you're the owner. There is no owner in a nonprofit, but you can still have a vested interest. You can still run operations. You can still call the shots in many ways. All right, let's dive into the next section, which is talking about the operations. So both models hire therapists. Both models handle documentation, scheduling, credentialing, marketing, you name it. All of that is the same and does not change under this model. But there are some unique differences in how the day to day might play out. So, in for profit operations, they're often lean and you can pivot quickly. And you don't really need anyone's permission to launch a new service or to raise your rates or to change your policies. That is a pro of having a for profit private practice. You get to call every and any shot you want. Nonprofit operations are a little bit more structured, and although you can call the shots, there's still a process that you have to go through. When you're making decisions as a nonprofit board, you document any kind of formal decision that you're making, and this is tracked in the board meeting minutes. This is not a requirement in for profits. You're also working from a mission driven framework, so services must align with your stated purposes of your nonprofit, whereas in a for profit practice, you don't have to do that. And then you might be building partnerships within community organizations, school districts, hospitals. And so collaboration with other people in the community becomes more central, whereas for-profit practices are often more isolated. So here's the kicker though, nonprofits can be just as innovative and nimble. And if you build the right culture and systems, you're going to be able to thrive, call the shots, and make the decisions that you want in your nonprofit. I'm sure we've all had this experience, but have you ever worked somewhere that feels mission aligned but super disorganized and have felt like you get the mission, but the operations are a mess, right? That often happens in community mental health. And pro of being a nonprofit private practice and not being categorized as a massive community mental health is that you don't have to have all these disorganized systems, all these people, multiple cooks in the kitchen that don't make sense when calling the shots. You can keep it very minimal as a micro nonprofit that is mimicking a for profit practice. So, if you have any questions about the differences in operations, let me know. But there really are not that many differences in operations. The biggest differences are the leadership and how that's structured at the top, and then the financials, which is what we're going to dive into next. And that's where it gets real, is when we talk about money. So, in a for profit, your revenue is mostly client payments, whether that's private pay or insurance, and possibly any like group programs or educational programs, like if you do workshops, and also supervision income. That's mostly where your revenue comes from. And you're taxed on all your profits. So, you take home whatever is left after expenses. And then, once you pay your taxes. This is where things look a little bit different in a nonprofit. You are taxed exempt under 501c3 when approved by the IRS. This means that you are not taxed on corporate income tax. You do not pay quarterly taxes like you do in a for profit. Huge. You can still bill insurance and accept client cash pay payments. This is a big myth that I hear a lot from therapists, that they think that they can't take insurance or that they can't accept cash pay clients and that they can't have a high rate premium pay as part of their tier and their sliding scale. You absolutely can. Many nonprofits have a top pay rate for clients that can afford it, and then they can use the rest of that funding to filter back into salaries or paying for other people who can't afford that. So you can absolutely have a premium pay still in the nonprofit model. But the great thing about it is that you can also unlock new funding opportunities that you can't do in a for profit, and that's grants, donations, sponsorships, and oftentimes state, county, or federal contracts, which are huge and can really make your nonprofit very sustainable. So here's where people get tripped up. Nonprofit does not mean free. It means the money gets reinvested into the mission. In order to reinvest the money into the mission, you have to be able to provide quality services. How do you provide quality services? You need to be able to pay your staff, and you need to be able to pay your staff well. So the money that gets reinvested back into the organization can be reinvested back into the salaries of your staff and for you. So that's how it all works. You absolutely get paid for providing the services in the nonprofit and give accessible care to clients and maybe even free services to clients, but it doesn't mean that the money is not coming in and being paid for. So just because it's free to the client does not mean you are losing out on revenue. It's supplemented with donations and grants. That's why they exist. Okay, to kind of wrap up, here's the truth. Nonprofits and for-profit practices, they're not opposites. They're just different vehicles. They can both be impactful, they can both be financially stable, and they can both be driven by purpose. But if you are feeling like the traditional private practice model doesn't fit you, then maybe it is time to explore something new and to think about this hybrid nonprofit model. So if this, sparks some interest, raise some questions, drop them in the comments, shoot me a message, email me. And if you want this handout, I turn these notes of the different breakdown of leadership, operations, and financial into a handout. Just comment on the live training handout and I will message it over to you, or you can drop your email address and I'll email it to you. I have free resources that break this idea down even further, but I wanted everyone to walk away with like a clear picture on the differences between for profit and nonprofit models. If you're interested in learning more about the programs that I offer, I have two main services. I have a full coaching program that walks you through how to exactly set up a nonprofit A to Z. And then I also have a done for you package where I set up everything for you. We hop on 2 coaching calls. I set up the structure for you and then develop a business plan, and then you carry home that business plan. The board of directors is made up of typically minimum 3 roles. The minimum 3 roles are the president, the treasurer, and the secretary. Now, there's oftentimes more than 3, and they can either have just titles of board member or there can be a vice president. It doesn't matter. As the executive director, an executive director is a paid position. It is a paid staff position. It's often known as the CEO as well. This is where you are paid to carry out the operations of the nonprofit. Now, the CEO can also act as a board member and board president, vice president, and any duties that are done by the board are volunteer. So the CEO doesn't get paid for those duties, but they can be on the board, they can be the founder, and they can be the executive director. And there are protections that you can write in your bylaws, which are the governing policies of the board that protect you as the founder. So a lot of people are, very worried about being kicked off their board as the founder and then someone else taking over. Well, here's the reality. Number one, if you're kicked off the board, then someone else has to take over all that work. Number two, you can write in your bylaws founder protections. You can write yourself a permanent seat on the board. Lots of founders, even once they retire, stay involved and have special seats on their board so that they feel like their legacy continues and the mission that they originally started goes on. This is where it's the same in whether you're a for-profit business or a nonprofit business. The rules about employees are exactly the same. There are some benefits to being an employee in a nonprofit versus for-profit, but when you hire on someone as a therapist, licensed therapists pretty much have the option of being a 1099 contractor or they can be a W-2 employee. There's pros and cons if you are hiring them as a contractor versus a W-2 employee. If you're hiring associates or pre-licensed clinicians, per the IRS regulations, they should be W-2 employees, and that's exactly how you would hire them under the nonprofit model as well. So for me, just to give you an example, I am on the board. I'm the vice president. I am also the executive director, so that's a paid position for me. And I hire W-2 clinicians, whether they're pre-licensed or already licensed. And then I also have 1099 contractors who are licensed clinicians. And here's a really big question that I get all the time. Can you do business to business contracting as a nonprofit? Absolutely. Happens all the time. So if you are hiring a 1099 contractor, a licensed clinician, and they have their own private practice and they want to do supplemental work for you, then the 1099 contract can actually be with their for-profit practice LLC. So for example, I have a licensed clinician. She's been working for me for 8 years. She is very passionate about my mission. It's not her full-time thing. It's just her part-time thing. But she has probably about a little less than 10 clients a week that she sees for my practice. And so she's a 1099, but we actually contract with her LLC. Now, the con for her in that is that she's required to pay taxes on that, right? It's not included in the payroll tax. But if you're a W-2 employee for a nonprofit and you work full time, then you qualify for public student loan forgiveness. And there's definitely certain rules and regulations in states where you might be limited to the number of supervisees that you can oversee as a licensed clinician in a for-profit, whereas in a nonprofit, it's unlimited. So I know California has that rule. I think there's a limit of 6 supervisees in for-profit practices, whereas under the nonprofit model, it's unlimited. There is no limit to the amount of people that you can supervise. How do you pay yourself as the CEO of the nonprofit? Well, this is up to you, and it needs to be approved by the board, but you can either pay yourself as a fee-for-service clinician, and then have administrative time that you pay yourself. And so you're more of an hourly type CEO, and that is determined and approved by the board. Or you can pay yourself a salary, just like you do in a for-profit business. So those things are the same that you can decide. But as the CEO, whether you're an hourly employee working fee for service or you are a salaried CEO, You don't want to be a 1099 contractor because then you're just going to have to pay taxes and it would kind of defeat the purpose of being tax exempt. So you want to set yourself up as a W 2. I've been a W 2 for my nonprofit for 13 years and I worked full time in my nonprofit. So I qualified for public student loan forgiveness and had my loans forgiven. And so, even as the CEO and working full time, it doesn't mean that you have to see. I got this question the other day. It doesn't mean that you have you have to see full time clients. No, there's plenty of other work to do as a CEO. So it can be for administrative work as well. As long as you're working full time, you can qualify for public student loan forgiveness. And you just have to have the board sign off on your public student loan forgiveness application for it to qualify. All you have to do when you're doing that application is plug in your nonprofit EIN, and they can immediately verify that it's a registered nonprofit with the IRS. So that's an excellent question, kind of side tangent about public student loan forgiveness. But yeah, as the CEO, you're a W 2 employee, and you can either be hourly or salary, and that's how you pay yourself. Super simple.